Okay, so on the address book, if you recall, I was talking about kind of the general structure in which we can set up our object-oriented uh, classes, constructor functions, so to speak, in JavaScript. And in JavaScript ES6, which is the newer version that came out a few years ago, you can set up actual like Java or C++ style classes. They're called. Um, so I don't want to get too bent out of shape on trying to emulate the Java approach so much. So these getter setter methods that I created here, I'm actually going to just avoid using those since I'm not going to use these in the program, and and actually by using uh, the local storage, these kind of have a conflict because when we export these, the name is ends up being a conflict, and we can't export the functions, the function methods here, without some extra steps to go through. So I'm going to actually just delete these, but we could construct it this way normally, but because we're going to be doing the JSON export and the local storage, I'm going to nix this. So that's going to simplify our code a little bit, and we're not using these external accessors anyway. But if we did, and I wanted to kind of point this out, if we did, we'd want to just rename it to, like in this case, get set contacts instead of just calling it contacts. Okay, because we run into a naming conflict. So just a little piece there that different makes it a little different. So I'm just going to get rid of these though. Okay, so that is that piece. And so now I want to just kind of take a peek at the um, working version. So, okay. Oh, okay, so, all right. I want to delete these. So because I have been debugging this, I created a little macro, um, which I would recommend doing if you're doing error checking and you have to fill in all these form fields. Building some kind of shortcut system for yourself is helpful. So I use this thing called Keyboard Maestro. I don't know if there's actually an analog to that on Windows, but on the Mac it's a lifesaver. So I just hit a hotkey and it opens up this and it fills in all my fields. Clicks there, it can actually navigate to different things and loads the photo, and it just kind of does that for me. Um, so anyway, the steps that I'm kind of going through here are I'm entering in my fields here. I'm adding my photo. I have to do all of these things. They all have to pass. All these tests have to pass in order to add this object. And then there is another test that happens. So if I do this again, you might have noticed that if I do the same name again, it actually yells at me and says that this person exists in the database. Do you want to add it anyway? Okay. So it does some rudimentary checking to see if there's a name collision, and that can happen, right? There are people that have the same name, so that can happen, and maybe you do want to add somebody with the same name, but it gives you that warning. So you can do some additional testing beyond just error checking. You can test for other conditions too. So I'm doing that too. So that is one little thing to point out. So now I want to kind of just go through my working code, my working version code. So you can kind of just take a peek of this. And I do want to upload little snippets of this. I still haven't decided if I want to do that all in one non-working version or if I just want to give you the snippets separately. But I do want to give you a bunch of this code. Okay. So the first thing is the HTML on this. So there's a few things that are a little different. Um, well, one thing you might note first is I did some weird font things. So since the CSS is the simplest file, I should jump back to that. I tweaked that a little bit because somebody asked me about like how we would use a different font. So I just wanted to throw this in here just to show. So if you go to Google Fonts, you can just select a font. It actually gives you the code and it gives you a little import, and we can throw that in here. And then it tells you where to put this. So I'm actually going to swap this out and show you how to do that real quick. So if I just go to Google Fonts, so if I don't love that font, which I don't, I'm just going to click on a category here. So I'm going to use the handwriting category. I'll pick out just this other one here. So I'm going to click the little plus. Then I'm going to click on the little box that's here. And then I'm going to click on this line that says import, and that's the one that we want. And you see that it's in these style tags, but I don't need those style tags because I'm going to put it right in my style sheet. So I'm going to copy that import line, go right back here, paste it right over the top of that, and then I'm just going to grab this font family right here, and I'm going to just paste it right over the top of that, save it, go back to my page. I can close up Google Fonts, and I'll refresh this, and it changed the font. Okay, so easy enough. So so that is that. So that's so I did that for H1s, H2s, H3s. So going down the line here. So much like we had in the Hello World and the travel calculator, container, row, I'm giving this an ID. I'm giving this an ID, but this is just a column. So I have this column and I have this column. Okay, so I just really have two columns, but the left column is skinnier than the right-hand column. So that's one thing to note. So it's a 4 width instead of an 8, and instead of 6, it's 4 and 8. And here's an H3, so that gets that special font. Then I have the font or the form. And then I have all those fields that I just copied and pasted from Bootstrap. I have some placeholder text, and then I have these patterns that we talked about, the regular expression patterns. Okay, so I'm just doing some basic testing here of the of what I want to have entered. Okay, so in this case, it's a name. I just put Steve Jobs as a placeholder name here. I could put anything in here. I could put everybody's favorite person, something like that. And I could put so this is basically saying anything that's not a space. So from the beginning of it, this is the entire string. So the caret and the $ means look at the entire thing from beginning to end. The very beginning has to start with non-space characters, so at least one of those. So non-space character, and a space character could be a space or a tab, and then followed by at least one space character. So this would also be valid, which maybe you don't want it to be valid. Okay, so that's something that you could keep in mind. So if you only want one space, you get rid of the plus. But I wanted to allow for that, and then followed by any number of non-space characters. Okay, but now keep in mind that's also going to allow that to be valid. Okay, so you got to kind of use your judgment as to what you want to allow through, still be user friendly without it. This isn't going to offer any advanced feedback either. Okay, so this isn't going to tell the user why it didn't pass. It's just going to say it didn't pass by signaling with that red. Okay, so there are pros and cons to having a lot of intense checking. Okay, to me, you just want to have like the barest essentials. You don't want to allow something completely crazy in here. So the address is much more complex looking, but this too is actually pretty simple. So go from the start. I have anything that's not a comma. So that's what this is. This complicated looking thing here is this when the caret symbol is inside brackets. The brackets is a character class. So this is saying anything in this character class is brackets, and I could put like A, B in here. So that means any number of A and B but instead I'm saying anything that's not a comma. So any number of those. Okay. So that matches this because these aren't commas. Followed by followed by a comma. Okay, so that matches actually all the way to here. Okay, so this matches all the way to here. Comma matches this, and then an optional space. So I could actually get rid of that, and that would be valid, which sometimes people would maybe write it that way, I figured. Followed by anything that's not a comma, followed by a comma, followed by an optional space, followed by a two-digit space, two character state. Okay, so this is saying capital A through capital Z, and you can provide a range there. That's in the character class, and these curly braces mean exactly two of those, and then followed by at least one space. So there does have to be a space after the between the state and the zip code, and then finally the zip code is \D means it has to be numbers, and there has to be 5 of them. Okay, so this looks really complicated, but if you break it down, none of the individual segments is that difficult. And again, you can go to that regxr.com, and there's the cheat sheet, and you can kind of build these up. Okay.
What is the first caret doing?
That's a great question. The first caret is you could think of it as being like an invisible character at the beginning of the line. Okay, so it just signifies the beginning of the string. Okay, so you could think of it as matching like this quote almost. Okay, but not including the quote. Okay, yeah, so it's like kind of like it's just a special thing. So if we got rid of that, we could put gibberish at the beginning, and it would still match, which we don't want. Okay, we want to match the entire string exactly perfectly. We don't want to match a substring. We want to match the full string in its entirety. Okay. So yeah, that's a great question. So the reason I always put the caret and the $sign on is because I want to take control of the entire string. I don't want to just match part of it. If we just wanted to make sure Green Bay showed up, we could just put a regular expression that had Green Bay in it, and we just want to make sure Green Bay showed up in it. Okay. So after you look at that one, then phone numbers are really easy looking, right? So again, caret to show that we're taking control of the beginning of the string. And phone numbers are kind of weird because you don't want it to start with a 0 or a 1 because those have a special meaning. So any number that's 2 through 9, followed by any other 2 digits. Okay, so 2 through 9, followed by any 2 digits, followed by a dash. Now, this isn't going to allow for people who use like periods in here, right? Or it's not going to allow for, this syntax, right? So you have to be aware of that, right? People are going to do all sorts of crazy things with all of these things, and this isn't going to provide them any feedback. So you either need a more complex regular expression if you want to allow for all those things, or you got to provide some feedback through your JavaScript for those things. So anyway, followed by a dash, followed by exactly 3 digits. So that's this. Followed by a dash, followed by exactly 4 digits. Okay. Email is actually awesome because by making it an email field, there's a built-in regular expression built into the browser. We don't have to write it because it's super long and complicated. It would actually fill this whole page, longer than this whole page. It's really, really long and complicated, but it matches email addresses in a pretty full-featured way. So that one's kind of like just magic, and you just get it for free. And the date, I'm doing some kind of complex things here. So I'm saying it has to start with a 0 or a 1. So I'm doing kind of a padded date. So it's not accepting a 1-digit date. You have to pad it with a 0. So it has to start with a 0 or 1 for the month. Okay, so it's month first. So we're doing the American style, not anywhere else. And then if we want to have a slash character, that's where this gets a little confusing. We have to, because slashes are a special character in regular expressions. We have to put a backslash to escape it. So it's // to provide for an actual / character. Okay, so this // is just // then followed by any digit from 0 to 3, because we have months with 31 days, 30 days. So that matches this, followed by any digit, followed by a /, followed by a 1 or a 2, because anybody we know is born either in the 1s or the 2s, followed by any 3 digits. And that might not be reasonable either. There's probably some additional rules there, but that seemed kind of reasonable. Okay. So, and that is kind of it for the regular expression error checking. And then I don't know if I mentioned this the other day, but so when we're loading in our photos, and that's what this section of code is. So then we have a couple of other things to make note of. So here I'm using an input type of file, which probably makes a little bit of sense. But then the name, I'm giving it a name of new contact photos with a bracket, with the array bracket, the square brackets. And that is because the file type could potentially allow you to upload multiple files. Okay, so it's on us in our JavaScript to only accept one, really. Okay, and then I can provide this other property here to say accept only images. So that allows us to only that's where it'll gray out other image or other file types in our file picker if the browser supports that. Okay, and I think that's basically that. Anybody have any questions about anything that was in here? There's a lot of stuff that's kind of in there so far. And everything else, like the, and then I do have a little piece of weirdness with the upload buttons. There's some magic CSS that I had to do to make those kind of function. So that is right here. I had to do this margin bottom 0.2 for the JSON button label, and let's see, yeah. So the input file valid, I had to do border none. I thought I had to do display none somewhere. Did I get rid of that? Oh, right here. So the new contact photo and the upload JSON, I actually made. Oh, this should be 0. I was playing around with this. So I have to, and actually I can just go back to display none. So the actual, and oh, actually I should just show you what this looks like. So if I just have the regular file fields in there, they look like this. These file things are here, and there are associated buttons for these, but I'm kind of overriding those, so I add a display none to get rid of those, and the other buttons kind of take the place of those. So this button and this button take the place of those to make it look nicer, because those are ugly buttons, right? So, so that's kind of that. All right, so then our JavaScript. Not this one, this one. Okay, so I'm gonna just collapse all this stuff. So because we're gonna use this a lot, I did make this little shortcut. I think I might have talked about before, where I have document get element by ID, pass the ID in. So I'm just making function by ID. So then I can just use by ID instead of document get element by ID. Okay, it just shortens it up so I can fit things in 80 columns easier. Okay, and then so this is really the whole program collapsed down. So I just hit the little chevrons here. Okay, so I have the contact object, the address book object, and I'm creating a new address book, which in this case, because it's the way JavaScript works, this runs whatever's in the address book function. Okay, so our entire program is really in the address book function. Okay, so let's open that up. In the address book function, we have our contacts array and the newest contact photo. And I can actually get rid of this now because I talked about that. All right, so let's see, where should I start here? Let's keep talking about the validation, okay? So when I read in the values, so let's jump to the bottom where I actually do that. So so when I click on the add a contact button, okay, that invokes this add contact function. So when I click on add this contact, that's this new contact button. So it invokes this add contact method. So we'll jump back up to there. Okay. And so because I'm going to do some error checking, I have this Boolean variable called valid contact. So I want to know if it's valid before I add it to our array. And anybody remember what an array is? I think I glossed over that before. Good. Okay. So you guys should call me out on that. If you don't know, you should say something. All right. So in this case, we have an array of contacts. And again, like on W3 Schools, I went through this really fast, but the concept is really simple. Oops. Let's see, JavaScript. So arrays are just collections of multiple values. Okay, so here it's just simple string values. You can have, they probably have numbers in here somewhere. So maybe not. So they just have strings here. But you can access the individual items. You can, there are, we can, there are properties on them. We can run a function to sort them. If it's a string, we can sort it. We can get the length of the array to count the number of items there are in the array. We can access them by individual number, so we can get the very first item, which is, in this case, fruit 0 is banana. We can get the last item like this by getting length -1. We can do for each to go through all the items. Don't do it this way. Do it this way. And we can push items onto the end of the array using the push method. So it's just a collection of items, and we have some really simple ways of dealing with these collections. Okay, so and JavaScript makes this really easy. In some other languages, arrays are much more difficult. So I go kind of fast through it in JavaScript, but. All right, so we have in here, just like we did with the travel calculator, we're reading in our values, and because these are all string values, I don't have to make them numbers. So in the travel calculator, I recommended that you wrap it in a number like this. In this case, I'm not doing that because these aren't numbers. These are typically string values. So I'm reading the value in, and then I'm setting, and just to make things fit on the line, I split this into 2 lines. So I'm getting the name field, and then I'm getting name field.value, and I'm assigning that to add name. I'm kind of doing that for all of these. So this is kind of taking up 2 lines here because I have these long ID names. Okay. And then here I'm setting up my regular expressions in JavaScript to do some additional checking. So So this is the regular expression I'm using in JavaScript to check for a valid name. I'm using the exact same one that I used in HTML to check for a valid address, same exact one for a valid birth date. But I'm also doing some advanced logic here to check for a valid birth date beyond that. Okay. And then this is how I run those tests. So I can do valid name. So I run it on the regular expression. So I go valid name, which is the regular expression, dot test, and then I pass it the string. And if it fails the test, then I set valid contact equal to false. So then I go through and do that for each of these. So I see if the address is greater than 0. If it is, then I run the test. It's false. Birth date, same thing. And then the other thing, though, is this validate birth date. I run is birth date bad. And I think that was up here. Yep. So this is something you could do something like this or not. Is birth date bad? Splits the birth date apart and checks the month, the day, the year to see if these are valid values. Okay. So we know there can only be 1 through 31 days. We know there can only be, but we actually know it's more granular than that. So I'm saying if it's February, we know that the day can only be 29. Okay, so this actually checks to see if you put 30 days for February, and it'll catch that. It'll also check to see if you entered a year before 1900 or a year after 2019. Because we don't want anybody born after 2019 entering their birth date into here. Okay, and you could adjust this if you don't want it to be 2019. And I'm also checking for leap years. So I don't think does anybody know what this operator is? That's a great guess. It is sometimes the wildcard, not in JavaScript.
The remainder.
It's totally the remainder. Yeah, it's called the modulo or modulus operator. Yeah, but it's the remainder. Yep. So I'm doing the year divided by 4, and if the remainder is 0, then do this stuff. Okay. So it's totally the remainder. That's exactly what it is. They should just call it the remainder because why make it complicated, right? So that's all it is. Just checking for the remainder. So if the year is 2020. The remainder would be, after I divide by 4, is 0. Okay. If the year 2020 is divisible by, if we divide by 100, what's the remainder? Well, it's not that. Then it's not 0. So we check all these things. So there's actually complex rules to determine if it's a leap year, right? So if it's divisible by 100, then it's not a leap year. But if it's divisible by 400, then it's a leap year again. So it's every 4 years, except every 100, except every 400. So this is what it takes to determine if it's a leap year. So so you have to go through all that if you want to actually be accurate. So if you want to check for a valid birth date, you got to go through all that. The only thing I would update on this, if I were doing it over, is maybe change this to be more dynamic. Maybe check for the current date and do some calculation based on that. Okay. So that gets a little complicated. Not too bad though. And then we do some checking on the photo. So the photo is, do I not do that right here? Thought I did that right here. Maybe not. That must be in the upload photo. So in the upload photo, I do want to touch on that. I should have these in an order that I understand, right? Let's see. Okay, so in my handle file select. So this happens when I hit the new photo, and notice that this is a change listener. Okay, so this file selector happens when I pick a new file. Okay, so if I just click the button and I don't select a file, nothing happens here. Okay, so I have to actually select a file for this to happen. So in handle file select, I grab this my new contact photo, but I grab the files, and again, this is an array. Files is an array, so I have to grab the first item because I only want one. Okay, so that's where that array was entered in there in the HTML. We're going to grab the first item. So this is where arrays kind of come in to the picture. So we're going to grab the first item, which is item number 0. And so then I want to make sure that it's a JPEG because I just did. It's already going to be an image format of some kind, but I just wanted to make sure it was a JPEG just to prove I could. That's where this kind of comes in. The rest is sort of boilerplate, just reading in a file. But this is kind of interesting to see if it's a JPEG. Okay, so I'm just going to give you this stuff because it's just kind of just the way it is. Most of it is. So this part, this shows kind of the idea of object-oriented programming and how you can string things together as long as you know what the output of one of the things, what one of the methods is expecting. Okay, so we're kind of going left to right here. Okay, so left to right, we have our image that we got. Okay, so this image has a name property. Okay, so the image is an object. That image object has a name property that is a string. So a string looks, something like that. But it's going to have a file name. It's going to have a file name. This is going to be, in my case, mine was like workers.jpg. Okay. So workers.jpg, I can apply the split function. So I'm going to split on the period. Okay. And then, so this provides an array as output to the pop function. The pop function, I want to take the last item, which is going to be the JPG, and then I can pass that to the toLowercase function. In this case, it was already lowercase, but if it was uppercase, I'm going to convert it to lowercase JPG and see if it compares against this. In my case, it did, but if it didn't, it's going to say alert file must be a JPEG. Okay, so I could break this into multiple steps. You don't get any extra points for making it, clever like this, but this is just because we know that the output of each of these things can be strung together. You can do this. Okay, so, and this is all in an if, so we can pack a lot of logic into an if statement, and that can be confusing, and you should maybe avoid that where possible. But these are things that can happen, and if you don't know what's going on, it can obscure a lot of complexity. So then the other thing that's of interest in here is I'm showing the thumbnail of the image that I selected right away. So when I load it, I'm grabbing the ID of, I kind of have a phantom image property. Where am I doing that? Yep. So right here, I just have this blank image. I don't have a source or anything here. I just have this ID. So just a blank image, just as a holding spot. So it's just blank. There's no source. There's no image. So there's no image. It's just a holding spot for an image. So I'm grabbing the ID, and I'm setting the source right here to the newest contact photo. That's it. All right, so then let's see. So we added the contact, like we grabbed the contact data. So once that's actually validated, so we went through all this. Now this is where I'm checking to see here if my contacts array is an array. I'm checking to see if there's any items in it. So if it exists, then I'm going to check to see if the contact that I'm adding already exists. So that's where that happens. Okay, so I'm giving a warning if it exists in the database. Are you sure you want to add it? And if all that passes and I'm going to add it, this is where the actual adding to the database happens, or the adding to the array happens. Okay, so I'm creating a new contact here with those variables that I validated. So this fundamentally is very simple. If we weren't doing any error checking, we could just have done this with the input and been done. But we're doing a bunch of error checking. And then here's where I'm adding it to the actual array. So I created a contact, and then I add the contact right here. We're using the push. So we have pop to pull it off and push to push it on. I'm pushing this onto the end of the array. So I have a new contact, and I'm pushing new contact onto contacts. And then I right away write it to the local storage so that it'll be stored the next time I open up the browser. And then finally, I clear out the form so I can add another one, and I wipe out that display image so that I can add another one. And then I update the display of the address book to reflect the fact that there's new data in there. So I think that is all of the things that should be kind of new that I'm not just going to kind of give you outright. Let's see. Anybody have any questions about anything? I know it's boring and monotonous hearing somebody go through code, so I want to stop.
And that date, for instance,
Yeah.
that seems, it would seem like that there's a desire for efficiency, and that would say that some smart person has put a date validator out there as a function that you could invoke, rather than putting a date validator.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. Yeah. That's true of all of this stuff. Yeah. I mean, everything that we're doing in this class has been done better by other people. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it though. So yeah, there's better code out there for everything, and for lots of reasons, right? So there's stuff that I'm giving you that I'm trying to construct in certain ways that's kind of easier to explain in some cases. Sometimes it's intentionally difficult to explain because I want to demonstrate some things that are more difficult. But yeah, there are definitely shortcuts. Yeah. And partly because JavaScript is the most popular language there is. So there are lots of easier ways to go about doing this. Yeah. And people do all sorts of things. They take all sorts of shortcuts and do all sorts of things wrong with JavaScript. That's why websites don't always work. Because there's all sorts of things going wrong all the time. Yeah. But there probably is a more sophisticated, simpler way to do this validation. Because I'm probably missing some other edge cases too. Because I just did this off the top of my head. I didn't look anything up for this. I just did this. So there's probably some other rule about leap years that I don't even know. Yeah, actually, I saw a proposal that leap years. Somebody proposed that we just we get rid of leap year, like being on the 29th, and replace it with and just have every day of the year be the same every year, and then every whatever it was, every 7 years or something, just add a week for Christmas. Have a party for a week or something. I don't know what the exact proposal was, but then scheduling things would be super easy because you wouldn't have to figure out like what date something is. But it sucks for people whose birthday would always be on a Monday then. So anyway, I'm gonna stop this. Unless anybody has any questions about any of this. Yeah.
So, kind of on like the date thing still.
Yeah.
So, if you wanted to specify a date, sorry, did you just put that actual date in as like your cutoff line? Like you have the 2019, could you put an actual like today's date in there, and would it still work?
I mean, you'd have to. So what I'm doing here is I'm splitting this into its components, its constituents. So you'd have to find out what today's day, month, and year are and compare those. But you totally can do that, yes. And in fact, that is right here. So if you want to know what today's date is, we can get, let's see, isn't it like today's date? I just want to know what today's date is. Date get. See, now I'm. Okay, yeah. So it's like. Yeah, so we can get the. Yeah, so we can get the year like this. So you just run d.get full year. So you can get this, and you can get the month, get the date, and you could compare those. Yeah, so it's actually really easy to do. So you could say like you can't be born after today. Yeah, you could totally do that. And that's a good idea. Like I should totally do that because otherwise I have to go in and remember to update my code every year, right? So that's a much more robust way of doing things. However, what do you think would be a downside of that? Like if you were writing this as production code for something, like for instance, let's say you were making a site for a beer company, and you wanted to keep, kids out. What do you think kids might do? Well, so that not only could they lie about it, but they could do something else, right? I'm not the only one that's ever tried to do this, am I? Right? Because you can set the time on your computer, right? Yeah. And so this time is based on the time on your computer, because JavaScript runs on the client computer, right? So this isn't just calling like the absolute time god; it's calling the time that's on your computer. So if that's wrong, it's going to provide you wrong results. So that is something that can be an issue, right? So if you really wanted to be secure about that, you could get the time from a server somewhere and get that. But like that's more complex. But yeah. So for our purposes, we could totally do it this way and nobody's going to care, right? But like if we actually wanted to really error check things, like it gets harder. Yeah. I guess I'm the only one that ever tried to lie about my age. All right. So excellent question though. Anybody else have anything? Good.